I never thought I'd be fired by my fiancée just 2 weeks before our wedding, but there I was, sitting across from Richard in his sleek corner office at Harrington Enterprises, watching him shuffle papers without meeting my eyes. "Emily, we need to talk about your position at the company," Richard said, his voice cold and detached. I'd never heard him speak to me that way before. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my stomach knotting with unease. The morning had started so normally. Coffee with the executive team, my presentation on the new marketing strategy, then Richard's assistant calling me in for an urgent meeting. "The board feels your recent decisions regarding the Miller account were questionable at best," he continued. "And as CEO, I have to make difficult choices for the good of the company." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The Miller account had been struggling for years before I took over. In just 6 months, I'd increased their revenue by 37% by implementing strategies Richard himself had initially rejected. "But the Miller account is thriving now," I protested. "The quarterly reports show—" "This isn't up for discussion," Richard cut me off sharply. "We're restructuring the department, and your position is being eliminated." My mind raced. This made no sense. I'd been working at Harrington Enterprises for 4 years, climbing from marketing associate to senior director through hard work and proven results. Richard and I had started dating 2 years ago, and while we'd kept our relationship professional at work, everyone knew we were engaged. Our wedding invitations had gone out months ago, including to every board member sitting on the executive floor right now. "Richard, what's really going on?" I asked quietly. "Is this about what happened at dinner with your parents last week?" His jaw tightened. Last week, Richard's mother had suggested I sign a prenuptial agreement that would essentially leave me with nothing if our marriage ended. When I asked for time to have my lawyer review it, the temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees. "This is strictly business," he said, finally looking at me. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance. HR has already prepared your paperwork." "You're firing me 2 weeks before our wedding," I stated flatly, my engagement ring suddenly feeling heavy on my finger. "Because I wanted legal advice on the prenup your mother ambushed me with." "You're not being a team player, Emily," Richard said, his voice rising. "The Harringtons have built this company over 3 generations. If you truly loved me, you'd understand what's at stake and sign the papers without making a scene." "A team player? Is that what you want in a wife?" I could feel tears threatening, but I refused to cry in front of him. "Someone who just follows orders without question?" Richard stood up abruptly. "You know what? Maybe this is for the best. If you can't trust my family's intentions, perhaps you're not worthy of the Harrington name after all." His words hit me like a physical blow. After 2 years together, countless nights planning our future, this was what he really thought of me, an employee to be dismissed when I didn't follow orders. "I see," I said quietly, slipping the engagement ring off my finger and placing it on his desk. "Consider this my resignation from the position of future Mrs. Harrington as well." As I walked out of his office with my head held high, I could feel every eye on the executive floor watching. Richard's assistant couldn't even look at me as she handed me a box for my personal items. I spent the next week in a daze, cancelling wedding arrangements and returning gifts. My phone was flooded with confused messages from guests. I couldn't bring myself to explain what had happened. How do you tell people the man you loved fired you for wanting legal counsel on a document designed to leave you penniless if he ever decided to discard you? Then, 7 days after the firing, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Gerald Harrington, Richard's father and the company's founder, was standing at my door looking somber. "May I come in, Emily?" he asked, his voice gentle in a way Richard's never quite managed to be. I hesitated, but then stepped aside. Gerald had always been kind to me, treating me like the daughter he never had, unlike his wife, who made no secret of thinking I wasn't good enough for her son. "I owe you an apology," Gerald said once we were seated in my living room. What Richard did was unconscionable. I only just found out. You didn't know? I asked, surprised. Gerald shook his head, looking suddenly older than his 65 years. I've been in Tokyo finalizing the Matsuda partnership. I returned yesterday to find you gone and the wedding apparently cancelled. When I asked Richard what happened, he gave me some nonsense about irreconcilable differences. He fired me, Gerald, I said bluntly, because I wanted my lawyer to review the prenup before signing it. Gerald's face darkened. Catherine's prenup? I specifically told her not to interfere. He sighed heavily. Emily, I didn't build this company by surrounding myself with yes men. I built it by recognizing talent and rewarding integrity. Richard seems to have forgotten that. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The wedding is still scheduled for Saturday. I'd like you to reconsider. I can't marry someone who would discard me so easily, I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve to stay strong. I'm not asking you to marry Richard as he is now, Gerald said cryptically. I'm asking you to trust me, one last time. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from Gerald in his private office, a space even more impressive than Richard's. Unlike his son's minimalist design choices, Gerald's office told the story of a life well lived. Photos from around the world, mementos from business deals spanning decades, and a well-worn leather couch where he admitted he sometimes slept when working late. Emily, do you know why I started Harrington Enterprises? Gerald asked, pouring us both coffee from his personal machine, no assistants interrupting this conversation. To revolutionize supply chain logistics, I answered automatically. It was the company line printed in every brochure. Gerald chuckled. That's the what, not the why. He settled back in his chair. I started this company because I watched my father work himself to death for a boss who took all the credit and gave none of the rewards. I vowed to build something different, a company where merit matters more than connections. He took a sip of his coffee, studying me over the rim. When Richard brought you home 2 years ago, I saw something in you that reminded me of myself at your age, hungry, smart, unafraid to speak truth to power. Richard doesn't seem to value those qualities anymore, I said quietly. My son has forgotten what matters, Gerald agreed, his voice heavy with disappointment. He's become too concerned with appearances, with pleasing his mother's social circle. This prenup business was Catherine's idea. She's always been obsessed with protecting the family legacy. Gerald stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Manhattan skyline. But she misunderstands what that legacy truly is. It's not about money or the Harrington name. It's about integrity, about treating people fairly. He turned back to me. I never told Richard, but I've been planning my retirement for some time now. I've been watching, evaluating who should take over when I step down. My eyes widened. You don't want Richard to run the company? I wanted my son to earn the right to run this company, Gerald corrected, just like everyone else. But I've watched him closely these past few years. He makes decisions based on who he's trying to impress, not what's right for the business or our people. Gerald returned to his desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a folder. Meanwhile, I've reviewed your work on the Miller account. Taking a client everyone had given up on and turning them around completely, that's exactly the kind of leadership we need. He pushed the folder toward me. Inside was a contract, naming me as the new Chief Operating Officer of Harrington Enterprises, effective immediately. This can't be real, I whispered, flipping through pages detailing a compensation package that made my head spin. It's very real, Gerald confirmed. And there's more. The board voted yesterday. While Richard will remain CEO for now, his authority will be shared equally with the COO. You'll have equal voting rights on all major decisions. I looked up at him in shock. Does Richard know about this? Gerald's smile was tight. Not yet. He'll find out at the wedding. The wedding that I cancelled? I reminded him. The wedding that is still very much on the books, Gerald countered. Unless you've actually returned the venue deposit? I hadn't. Cancelling everything on short notice meant losing thousands in deposits, and I'd been too emotionally exhausted to deal with it. Gerald, I can't marry Richard now, I protested, not after how he treated me. I'm not asking you to marry him, Gerald said simply. I'm asking you to show up. What happens after that is entirely up to you. I stared at the contract, mind racing. Why me? Why not bring in someone with more experience? Experience can be gained. Integrity, intelligence, and courage are innate. Gerald leaned forward. Emily, in the 4 years you've been with us, you've generated more innovative solutions than executives with decades more experience. You see problems differently, and most importantly, you're not afraid to stand your ground, even against a Harrington. His expression softened. When Catherine and Richard ambushed you with that prenup, you didn't just sign it to keep the peace, you stood up for yourself, knowing it might cost you. That's exactly the kind of backbone this company needs. I spent that night reading every line of the contract, half expecting to find a catch. There wasn't one. If I signed, I would become one of the most powerful executives at Harrington Enterprises. I'd have authority equal to Richard's in most matters. But the question remained, could I face Richard again? Stand before his family and all our friends after he had so publicly humiliated me? As dawn broke over the city, I made my decision. I texted Gerald a single word. Yes. His reply came immediately. The car will pick you up at 2 p.m. Wear white. Saturday arrived with perfect weather. Sunshine streaming through scattered clouds, a gentle breeze keeping the August heat at bay. The wedding was set for sunset at the Harrington estate in the Hamptons, a sprawling property overlooking the Atlantic. I arrived early, directed to a guest suite where my dress waited. Not the custom gown I'd chosen months ago, but something new, sleek, elegant, powerful. Beside it lay a small velvet box with a note in Gerald's handwriting. For when the moment comes. More, inside was a ring unlike any I'd seen, not a diamond, but a platinum band inlaid with a pattern I recognized immediately. The Harrington Enterprises logo, reimagined as an intricate artistic design. It's beautiful, I whispered to the empty room, slipping it onto my right hand, not my left. Whatever happened today, I wasn't here to become Richard's wife. At exactly 5:30 p.m., as the first guests were being seated in the garden, Gerald knocked on my door. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. I still don't understand what you expect to happen, I admitted. Richard thinks I've returned the ring. He fired me. The guests will be confused. Gerald's eyes twinkled with something between mischief and resolve. Trust the process, Emily. By sunset, everything will be clear. As Gerald led me toward the ceremony space, I could see guests turning to stare. Many whispered behind their hands, no doubt wondering why the supposedly cancelled bride was making an appearance. I spotted Richard at the altar, his back to the gathering crowd. He was speaking with the officiant, completely unaware of my arrival. Wait here, Gerald instructed, leaving me partially hidden behind a decorative trellis covered in white roses. I need to have a word with my son. I watched as Gerald approached Richard, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Richard turned, his face lighting up at the sight of his father, only to transform into confusion as Gerald began speaking in low, urgent tones. I couldn't hear their words, but Richard's body language shifted from surprise to tension, his shoulders stiffening as he repeatedly shook his head. Their conversation ended abruptly when Catherine Harrington approached, looking resplendent in a pale blue designer dress. She glanced between her husband and son with narrowed eyes before saying something that made Richard's face flush red. Gerald responded with a few short words that left Catherine looking stunned, then turned and walked back toward me. "Phase 1 complete," Gerald murmured, looking pleased with himself. "Richard knows you're here. He's not happy, but he'll play along for now. Catherine is adjusting to the situation." "What exactly did you tell them?" I asked nervously. "The truth," Gerald replied simply, "that you'll be joining Harrington Enterprises as COO with authority equal to Richard's, and that today's ceremony will proceed with a few modifications." Before I could ask what modifications meant, the string quartet began playing, signaling guests to take their seats. The garden was transformed into an elegant wedding venue. White chairs arranged in neat rows, an aisle carpeted with rose petals leading to an arch draped in flowers and sheer fabric that billowed gently in the breeze. The setting sun cast everything in a golden glow, exactly as I'd envisioned when we'd first chosen this location. "It's time," Gerald said, offering his arm once more. "Remember, you're not walking toward a husband today. You're walking toward your future." As we stepped onto the aisle, a collective gasp rippled through the guests. Richard turned, his expression a complicated mix of emotions: anger, confusion, and something that might have been regret when he saw me in the new dress, clearly ready for something other than reconciliation. I kept my eyes fixed forward, my grip on Gerald's arm tightening with each step. When we reached the altar, Gerald didn't place my hand in Richard's as tradition dictated. Instead, he positioned me opposite his son, with the officiant between us. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant began, clearly briefed on the unusual situation. "We are gathered here today not for the union we originally anticipated, but for something equally momentous. The Harrington family and Emily Bennett have an important announcement to share with you all." Richard leaned toward me, whispering urgently, "What the hell are you doing? Did my father put you up to this?" I didn't respond, keeping my gaze steady on the crowd before us. Board members, executives, clients, and friends, all watching with rapt attention. Gerald stepped forward. "For 40 years, I've had the privilege of building Harrington Enterprises into the company it is today. Many of you have been part of that journey." He nodded towards several older executives in the front row. "Today marks a new chapter for our company and for our family." He turned to Richard. "Son, when I named you CEO 3 years ago, I believed you were ready to carry on the Harrington legacy. But leadership isn't about titles or bloodlines. It's about vision, integrity, and recognizing the value in others." Catherine moved as if to interrupt, but Gerald silenced her with a look before continuing. "The incident with Emily last week made something clear. We need a change in leadership structure." "The board agrees." Gerald gestured to the front row, where several board members nodded solemnly. "Emily Bennett will be joining Harrington Enterprises as Chief Operating Officer, with authority equal to Richard's in all operational matters." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Richard's face had gone pale, his hands clenched at his sides. "Dad, you can't be serious," he hissed. "She's not qualified. The Miller account's 37% growth under her direction suggests otherwise," Gerald replied smoothly. "Not to mention the Johnston merger she orchestrated last year, which saved us from a significant downturn." He turned to address the guests again. When Richard fired Emily for requesting legal review of a prenuptial agreement, an action any prudent professional would take, he demonstrated precisely why we need her counterbalancing perspective in our leadership. Catherine could contain herself no longer. "This is outrageous, Gerald. You can't possibly expect Richard to work alongside his ex-fiancée. What will people say?" "They'll say we value competence over comfort," Gerald replied firmly. "They'll say Harrington Enterprises puts business before personal feelings." Isn't that what you've always insisted on, Catherine? That the company comes first? She fell silent, her social calculation evident as she glanced around at the influential guests watching the drama unfold. Gerald reached into his pocket and removed the small velvet box I'd seen him with earlier. Emily, when my father started this company, he created a tradition. Each Harrington who takes a leadership role receives this. He opened the box to reveal a signet ring bearing the original Harrington logo, different from the one he'd given me earlier. For 3 generations, this ring has symbolized authority within our company. It's been worn only by Harringtons. Until today. Richard stepped forward. Dad, you can't. The board's decision is final, Richard. Gerald cut him off. You've demonstrated that you need a partner in leadership, someone who will challenge you when necessary and support you when appropriate. Gerald turned to me, his expression solemn. Emily Bennett, do you accept this position and all the responsibility it entails? Do you pledge to uphold the true values of Harrington Enterprises, integrity, innovation, and respect for all who contribute to our success? The garden was utterly silent. Every eye was on me as I took a deep breath. I do, I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Gerald smiled and placed the signet ring on my right hand next to the modern one he'd given me earlier. Then, on behalf of the board of directors, I officially welcome you to the leadership of Harrington Enterprises. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing stronger as several board members rose to their feet. I noticed Richard's closest allies remained seated, looking stunned, while others seemed genuinely pleased with the development. Richard stepped close to me, his voice low and furious. You won't last a month. The executive team is loyal to me. Are they loyal to you or to the Harrington name? I asked quietly, because your father just made it clear which side he's on. Gerald raised his hands for silence. Now, I believe we have a celebration planned. While today doesn't mark a wedding, it does mark a new beginning for Harrington Enterprises. Please join us for dinner and dancing as originally scheduled. As guests began making their way toward the reception tent, Catherine approached me, her smile tight and false. Well played, Emily. I didn't think you had it in you. This wasn't my plan, I told her honestly, but I'm not sorry it's happening. Don't get comfortable, she warned, her voice dropping. Richard is still a Harrington. You're still an outsider. Gerald appeared at my side, having overheard. Catherine, haven't you realized yet? It's not about being a Harrington by blood or by marriage. It's about embodying what the name should stand for. He looked at me with unmistakable pride, and Emily has earned her place fair and square. The reception that followed was unlike any corporate event or social gathering I'd ever attended. What had been planned as a wedding celebration transformed into something between a company restructuring announcement and an elaborate power play, all set against the backdrop of exquisite floral arrangements and a 5-course dinner. Guests clustered in groups that revealed the company's political landscape more clearly than any organizational chart ever could. Richard held court near the bar, surrounded by executives from departments he directly controlled. Catherine circulated among the old money families, damage control evident in her forced laughter and animated gestures. Meanwhile, Gerald introduced me to key board members and major clients as the future of Harrington Enterprises. The signet ring on my finger drew curious glances and prompted questions that Gerald answered with practiced ease, spinning the story as a triumphant example of meritocracy rather than the messy personal drama it partially was. Emily has the vision this company needs moving forward, he told the CEO of our largest client, an international shipping conglomerate. Richard brings the historical knowledge. Emily brings fresh perspective. Together, they'll take Harrington Enterprises to new heights. The client raised an eyebrow. "Assuming they don't kill each other first," he remarked dryly, looking across the tent where Richard was watching us with undisguised hostility. "Creative tension can be productive," Gerald replied with a wink. As the evening progressed, I found myself approached by employees from various departments, marketing assistants, logistics managers, even cleaning staff who'd been invited as part of Gerald's inclusive philosophy. Their congratulations seemed genuine, many sharing stories of times I'd remembered their names, acknowledged their contributions, or championed their ideas when others wouldn't listen. "We're really glad you're staying with the company, Ms. Bennett," said Tanya from accounting, who I'd worked with on the Miller account. "After we heard you were fired, well, a lot of us were updating our resumes." Her candor surprised me. "Really?" She nodded. "You're one of the few executives who actually knows what we do down in the trenches. Mr. Richard hasn't visited our floor in over a year." This pattern repeated throughout the night. Richard commanded respect through position, while I apparently had earned it through action. It was a revelation that both humbled and empowered me. Around midnight, as the celebration was winding down, I found myself alone on the terrace overlooking the ocean. The moon cast a silver path across the dark water, and for the first time all day, I had a moment to process everything that had happened. "Quite a view, isn't it?" came Richard's voice from behind me. He approached slowly, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to me, which I hesitantly accepted. "I always loved this spot," I admitted. "Remember when we talked about building a house nearby?" Richard nodded, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "I remember a lot of things, Emily, including how good we were together before all this. Before you fired me for wanting legal counsel," I reminded him, taking a sip of champagne. He winced. "I handled that poorly." "That's an understatement." "My mother was pressuring me," he began, then stopped himself. "No, that's not fair. I made the decision. I put the company, or what I thought was best for the company, ahead of us. And now we have to work together," I said, turning to face him directly. "Can you handle that, Richard? Because I meant what I said in there. I'm not going anywhere." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes tracing over my face as if seeing me for the first time. "You know, when my father told me you'd be COO, my first reaction was anger. But now I'm wondering if this isn't exactly what Harrington Enterprises needs." "What do you mean?" "You challenge me, Emily. You always have. It's what I loved about you before I let my ego get in the way." He leaned against the railing, looking out toward the ocean. "The board reports show it too. Departments under your influence consistently outperform the others. You connect with people in ways I never learned to do." I wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability. "So where does that leave us?" "Professionally? I think we could be a formidable team if we can move past the personal history." Richard turned back to me. "My father's right about one thing. I've been making decisions based on the wrong metrics, trying to impress people who can't actually help the company grow. And personally, I couldn't help asking, though I already knew my own answer. Richard's smile was sad but genuine. "I think that ship has sailed, hasn't it? Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired." I nodded, surprising myself with the lack of pain I felt at this acknowledgement. "I think you're right." We stood in surprisingly comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping our champagne and watching the waves. "For what it's worth," Richard finally said, "I'm sorry, Emily, not just for firing you, but for forgetting what made us good together in the first place, mutual respect." "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It matters." As if on cue, Gerald appeared at the terrace doors. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere." He approached, looking between us with cautious optimism. "Everything all right out here?" "We're negotiating a peace treaty," I said with a small smile. "Professional détente," Richard added, raising his glass slightly, "to new beginnings at Harrington Enterprises." Gerald's relief was palpable as he joined us at the railing. That's what I was hoping to hear. He placed a hand on each of our shoulders. You know, when I started this company, I dreamed it would outlast me, that it would become something greater than just one man's vision. He looked at me, then at his son. Tomorrow, the real work begins. The press will have questions. Employees will be uncertain. Competitors will be watching for weakness. We'll be ready, I assured him, surprised to find I meant it. Together, Richard added, extending his hand to me, not in romance, but in partnership. As I shook his hand, I felt the weight of the signet ring on my finger, a symbol not of marriage, but of something equally binding. A commitment to build something lasting, to lead with integrity, to prove that Gerald's faith in me was justified. Later that night, as my driver took me back to the city, I gazed out at the passing landscapes and reflected on the extraordinary turn my life had taken. 2 weeks ago, I'd been fired and heartbroken, my future uncertain. Now, I held a position of power I'd never imagined possible, not as Mrs. Harrington, but as something far more valuable, a leader chosen on merit, not marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Gerald. First executive meeting Monday, 8 a.m. Wear the ring. Show no fear. I smiled to myself, already planning my strategy. Richard would have his allies. I would need to build my own. There would be resistance, challenges, and difficult days ahead. But for the first time in years, I felt truly in control of my destiny. As the city skyline came into view, glittering against the night sky, I made a silent promise to myself and to Gerald. I would prove that his decision to trust me with his company's future was the best investment Harrington Enterprises had ever made. The wedding that never happened had given me something far more valuable than a husband. It had given me a purpose, a platform, and the chance to rebuild not just a company, but myself.